Welcome to the 6th ABCD Institute Higher Education Story Sharing Session. My name is Kim Hopes, and I am the Assistant Director of ABCD Partnerships here at the DePaul University Stain Center. I'll be facilitating in place of Howard Rosing, as he is unfortunately out ill today. Today's presentation is using ABCD as a pedagogical tool in a project-based learning course. I am pleased to introduce our presenter, Dr. David Taylor, who is Associate Professor of Criminology and Criminal Justice at Niagara University in Niagara, New York. He served for 7 years as the director of the Reverend Joseph L. Levesque CM Institute for Civic Engagement, which he co-founded in 2011. In his role at the Levesque Institute, Dr. Taylor worked to expand the university's community partnerships and to strengthen project-based and service learning at the university. Dr. Taylor currently teaches courses on race, gender, and class, homeland security, and building crime-resistant communities. He has published in the areas of kinship caregiving, poverty, and capital punishment. Recipient of both the Vincentian Mission Award and the Caritas Medal, David Taylor has dedicated much of his time at Niagara University toward identifying resources and implementing initiatives designed to assist the local community in such broad areas as crime prevention, disaster preparedness, neighborhood revitalization, and local food access. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to our presenter, David Taylor.
But I will get us started here on today's topic, and I need to from the beginning here. All right, so you all know the title for this this presentation, and so the title of the course was called Seminar in Asset-Based Community Development. And I created the course in part because after being here at Niagara for 23 years, and before that at Cal State Long Beach and Cal State Fullerton, I've really been reflective on, what I should be doing as a faculty member and the types of courses I want to teach. I'm a criminology and criminal justice professor. So I do still have to teach an intro course to criminal justice. And I do largely teach that in lecture style where I'm standing in front of the class. But where I have the opportunity to do it, I try to create some interesting courses for students. As you see here, courses that have a high impact, that involve deep learning. I'm a big fan of project-based learning and service learning. I also teach a careers in criminal justice course, and I'm realizing finally how little my students have to offer the marketplace when they leave. And so one of the things I've been trying to do in my courses, for example, in my Homeland Security course, my students leave there with a minimum of 7 things to immediately put on their resume. So after one semester in one class, their resume looks entirely different than it did when they started. I was also influenced, and Gallup puts these out every year, but the one that really grabbed me in 2014 was called Great Jobs and Great Lives. And they reached out to and surveyed 30,000 college alums about their level of engagement at work and their overall wellness. And one of the things, there were about 6 or 7 factors that were most correlated with people living great lives post-graduation. And one of them was being involved in a project that lasted for at least a semester, if not a full, school year. Other things that were critical in the Gallup-Purdue report was having a professor who got you excited about learning, a professor who cared about you, and a few other things. And then finally, I've long wanted to find a venue or a vehicle to teach the ABCD course. So this allowed me to do both of these things. So the second thing is why a Young Black Leaders Academy? So I've been teaching race, gender, and class here at NU for more than 20 years. And a few years ago, a friend of our family, actually my daughter's religious studies teacher, asked if she could sit in on my graduate class and audit it. And it was fine. It was great, actually. But at one point out of class, she asked me, who am I to be teaching this class and what makes me an expert on these issues? And I have gotten those sorts of questions before. And, at least in my department, if I didn't teach this class, my students would never be introduced to any authors of color for the most part. And I think, I teach that as a true seminar. It's very heavily discussion based. We're in a circle. And I more facilitate learning. But for some reason, her question stuck out and kind of not at me for some reason. I said a few years ago, I want to become more of an expert. And so I have been on this journey. And obviously, as you would imagine, I'm involved in a lot of DEI work here at the university. And, in a really formal way, we're new to this at Niagara. We've hired a vice president for this DEI work. And we're only in the first year, so I have to, keep my wits about me, but I've been frustrated because despite everything that's been going on in the last few years around the country, we don't necessarily see outcomes changing. So part of the idea of the Academy is, to try to focus on outcomes and do something in a local, small way where I can use my assets. And we'll talk more about that. The other reason, create more opportunities for young people of color in the city of Niagara Falls. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the city, in our heyday, we were almost 120,000 people in the 1960s, right? We had a lot of industry. Nabisco was here. We had steel plants that ran all the way from Niagara Falls to Buffalo. Stories went that you could quit your job at one plant in the morning, and in the afternoon, you'd be working, a few plants down the road. We're now about 47,000 people. So that's an incredible loss, a loss of population. And we're a small city, but we've got big city problems. And third, hopefully, with the Academy, and again, you'll as we go along, I mean, there's two things going on here. One is the actual Academy and that becoming a real thing, and an academic exercise, which in and of itself, I think was very useful and beneficial for the students. But the real goal is eventually for this Academy to become a real Academy and hopefully have youth prepared for college if they're interested in it. And if they're competitive for college scholarships, they would be competitive for pretty much anything else that they want to do. And so the first sort of, I've had a few experiences in my life that have sort of shaped the philosophy of how I imagine this Academy. First is the Vincentian Scholars Program, which is a really intensive service and learning program here at NU that I designed probably 10 years ago now. And so for the first 5 years or so, before other people got really interested in it, I was heavily involved and on the committee. And I remember reviewing all the applications for scholarships that came in. And I remember feeling very small because these young people were doing things in high school that I never did. I mean, they were all doing service learning. They had leadership positions. Some of them were doing internships. And so, as we would interview the students, and I don't know the demographics of Niagara, but we're not in a heavily diverse campus, some diversity, always looking for more. And so that's the first. I'm going to tie all these together here. The second one, so for my dissertation, I lived homeless in Los Angeles for about a year and a half, studying the relationship between the LAPD and chronically homeless street persons. And I would often pass this building with the name People's College of Law. And I do have a link in here to it. I'm not going to try to connect, but I think if you've never heard of it, you would find it very interesting because it, like a number of colleges, emerged in the 1960s during the fight for civil rights and social justice. And I wasn't sure, having revisited their website, if they would still have this in there, this language. But basically, they say, you know, what they fight for, and essentially they are preparing people to have the legal skills necessary to fight a court case all the way to the Supreme Court. And they were brazen enough to say earlier in the old days that if you were interested in working in a corporate law firm, this is probably not the place for you. Not something any business these days would do, which is turn people away. But they had a very singular mission, right? So I don't know if they have all the accreditations that, let's say, a UCLA law school program would have, but they had one single goal, which was to provide people like us the skills we needed to fight for social justice. The third one is kind of random, I know, but when I was out in California, I ran a community correctional facility in Garden Grove. And I started on the midnight shift there. And I had about 45 inmates who came straight from state prison in Southern California. And most of them spoke Spanish. And I knew they were talking about me when I was doing my rounds. And so we were required to do, you know, different trainings and professional development over the course of the year. And I wanted to know basically what, you know, so I could have some conversations with the residents of the work furlough program. And I had probably a few years of French in high school, which didn't help me on my Vincentian mission trip to France. And I had a few years of Spanish in college, which didn't help me really much. Probably some of that's my fault. So I found this basically community continuing ed course from some nonprofit or for-profit that was offering it, you know, one of those 6-week classes. And when I finished with that, I can't say that I could speak Spanish fluently, but I could speak it and I could understand it. And I remember that, and I tie it to the idea of this academy because, you know, they weren't concerned so much with grammar rules and the culture. It was simply one goal, which is to get you to learn how to speak and understand Spanish. So I'm applying those to the idea of the academy in the sense that our goal is for the students who go through this to leave there with a resume that rivals those of the students who are applying for the Vincentian Scholars Program at Niagara University. And we can come back to all this stuff at the end. So this might be, I'm going to have to, usually they tell you, you don't put something this big in a PowerPoint, but I think this will give you the overview of really what the course is all about. So I'm going to read this. This upper level undergraduate seminar is designed as a hands-on project-based learning experience where students will put into practice the skills they're learning around ABCD. We are going to use the instructors and the students' own assets to design a Young Black Leaders Academy. In order to accomplish this, students will take on different roles required in order for us to actually design the academy. Such roles could include curriculum design, marketing, fundraising, business development, and social media. The exact roles each of us play will be dependent upon our own assets, interests, and skill sets. In cases where collectively we do not possess the skills that we need to complete the project, we will use our own assets and networks to find the help that we need. In other words, we will put the ABCD approach into action in this course. This will not be a traditional course in any sense of the word. So a little bit about the course for the next few slides. I'm sure you're familiar with Kretzmann and McKnight, the Green Book, which is great because it's fully accessible online for the students. I assigned 2 other books, sort of, I don't want to say fun books to read, but they're not textbooks. One is Bob Lupton's Toxic Charity book. And a funny thing about that, for years, for about 12 years, I had a program called Sustainable Sandals. And over that period, myself and volunteers from the university, local churches, youth groups, we sent about 1 million sandals around the world to people who had no footwear. And so one alternative spring break year, I was on a plane with about 7 NU students, and we are heading to La Paz, Mexico. We had sent sandals ahead of time. We took extra suitcases with sandals. And I decide to read this book. And sure enough, we're approaching Mexico, and I'm reading in the book about a church in Mexico that had been painted 6 times in one summer because, well, youth groups were coming and they needed something to do. And so that whole book is about, our good intentions that sometimes go awry when we try to help. And the other book you should definitely be familiar with because it's sort of part of the collection on the ABCD Institute website as one of their publications. Mike Mather, a pastor in Indianapolis. And for what I'm talking about in here, it's one of my favorite books from 2018. The course had 5 basically assignments. There was an ABC workbook, which was essentially a comprehensive exam. One of the things I try to be cognizant of, when I teach a course like Careers in Criminal Justice or this course, that it does have academic rigor and that it's worthy of getting 3 university credits. So I want to make sure the students are paying attention to the videos I show, the documentaries and the books and other things that we talk about. So they do have one comprehensive exam for the course. It's not overly valued. It's just 200 points or 20% of the course grade. There's an ABCD portfolio, which is really each student's individual work toward the accomplishment of our final project, which is designing the academy, again, for a couple hundred points. And then the big course project presentation they have to put together. And, as you'll see in a little bit, some things went well, some things didn't go well, but I try to turn the course over to the students to empower them to take it where they want to go. And eventually they decided they wanted to do a group presentation, right? But that's okay. That's okay. Again, I think it was a great experience. I also asked them to keep a journal that they share with me at the end, and they're free to say whatever they want in that journal. I want them to be. And then unlike any other class I teach, I highly value attendance and participation for 200 points. There's a lot of materials, and I'd be happy to share all the materials I use in the course, but these are the 4 ones that I think were just fundamental to kind of especially setting the stage for what we wanted to do this semester. The first one, I hope you've seen some of these at least, is Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, her TED Talk called The Danger of the Single Story. One of the things I had to do in that class, it is a social justice class. Most of my students, it didn't have a prerequisite, so they hadn't necessarily taken my race, gender, and class course. So I do share a lot of stuff in there around social justice and DEI. But I start the class off with The Danger of the Single Story, because what she talks about is just that, right? When you have one single story about a person, a situation, it can lead to misunderstandings. So it's a nice way to sort of set the stage of a classroom for mutual respect over the course of the semester. The second one, and one of the problems I run into these days is a lot of my reference points, right, are going to be from the 90s and the early 2000s. And a lot of times my students, they don't know who Ted Koppel is. But in 1999, on ABC Nightline, Ted Koppel did something called The Deep Dive. And it was a segment on IDEO product design firm out of Palo Alto, California, which is still there and running strong. And I show that because what in the segment that they show on Nightline, the product design team is charged with redesigning the shopping cart to address 2 issues, which was an unbelievable number of injuries, particularly child injuries, from shopping carts. And then the second one is the theft of shopping carts, which in many cases are upwards of about $1,000 for each one of these shopping carts. And really, it wouldn't matter what the product is. It's really the process. And I'm going to show you a couple of pictures, just a couple of pictures in a second, of what I envision the class and how it would operate. The third one is called Holding Ground, and it's a documentary about the rebirth of Dudley Street. So I did live one summer just outside of Northeastern University, and Dudley Street is in Roxbury, just over the tree line. And at the time this video was, and when the Dudley Street initiative began, there was in this Dudley neighborhood, there was a lot of illegal dumping. People were setting their houses on fire and their businesses to get the insurance money. And so it was a really struggling neighborhood. And a group of mostly foundation people and banks, like, people like us with well intentions, decided that they were going to try to, put their resources together and develop a plan to revitalize the Dudley Street neighborhood area. And so they call a community meeting, a town hall, if you will, and the whole group of them are, on the stage, and they start talking about this wonderful plan to revitalize Dudley Street. And a woman in the audience, Shay Majun, stood up and asked how many of you were from the neighborhood. And sure enough, not one person on the dais was from the Dudley Street neighborhood. And that led to a whole basically rethinking of the process. And they kept the name, the DSNI, the Dudley Street neighborhood, but then they made sure in their, I guess you might call them bylaws, that 51% of the people on the board had to be neighborhood residents, right? So ultimately they had final say. And that's important because, we're talking about designing a group of university students, designing a youth academy, right? So in order for us to really be able to do this, we need to get youth involved. And then the fourth one is Bettina loves TED Talk, hip hop, grit, and academic success. And the big part of that I share is her concept of spirit murder. That particularly kids of color, when they go into schools, right, particularly public schools, they have to leave the essence of who they are behind. And she makes the argument that schools murder the spirit of kids, right? So all of four of these, and again, there's probably a good couple dozen in the first several weeks that I share, but these are the ones that stick out the most. Now, this is just kind of a funny video. This isn't what I imagined for our class, but I did tell them I wanted them up and about. I bought a whole box of multicolored sticky notes, multicolored dry erase markers. And this is probably more what I was envisioning, right? We are in a classroom, but we had 3 whiteboards. And this is what they did in IDEO, right? I mean, all of these folks are sharing their ideas, putting up on the stick. And that's really what I envisioned for the class. So the first real substantive thing we did, and then this really guided the whole semester, is we put our heads together. I had obviously a little initial list in mind, but we came up with sort of about 8 or 9 working groups that were important that we would need to do in order to design the framework of an academy. And some of these sort of combined. I think the business plan and marketing eventually became one, internships and leadership became one, and so on. So this was how once we sort of laid for the first maybe 1/3 of the semester, laying the framework and the groundwork, this really drove the students. We broke these up into group A and group B, and every other class we would focus on, because obviously, well, there were, I think, 11 students in the class. So each student had at least 2 of the working groups that they were involved with. But every other class we would tackle the A working groups, and then the next class we would tackle the B working groups. The next class we would come back together, and we did that through the semester. I haven't lectured in a while, so I apologize. So in reflecting on the class, in terms of what went well, I sort of did some recruiting. There were students I was familiar with on campus who I wanted to be in the class. And I didn't want a class of all criminal justice majors. So in the end, I ended up with 11 students, including a business major, early childhood education. I've been envisioning the academy as a rough grade 6 through 12. So this student was in early childhood education, I think K to 6. but at least she was in the ballpark, right? And in theory, she was in classes and she had faculty and she connected with other education majors. So it was at least one person who had ideas about curriculum, I hoped. Africana Studies and Theater major, sociology, few criminal justice students, and 2 graduate students. I would say the first third to half of the class was incredible. The enthusiasm for this different approach, the freedom I gave them to actually design something, which I find students love that. One year, a colleague and I put together something called Entrepreneur, but competition with NU there at the end. And we tasked NU students with solving food access issues in the north part of the city of Niagara Falls. I pitched this idea to 2 of the 4 deans, to all 4 deans, and 2 of the deans told me, and this is going back probably 6 or 7 years, you know, you can do it, but you may get a handful of students who are interested. We've tried this sort of thing and it just doesn't get any attention. Well, we ended up with over 100 plus students and 30 different teams that wanted to come together outside of class and solve this issue of food access in Niagara Falls, right? And we also brought I brought a few guest speakers in, and you see, I'll come back to that in a minute. We're almost done. I think there's just a few more slides left. And our visits to community centers, which were good, but they were complicated. From this, again, pilot class, this experimental class, we made some good headway toward what I was hoping for, right? The students generated, one of the groups, I think the marketing group generated a logo that the rest of the class really liked. We came up with an extensive list of opportunities for leadership positions and internships. A good start for research justifying the need for the academy. Great feedback. So what I did was I gave the students, I reached out to about 30 of my community partners, letting them know that I'm going to give their contact information to my class, and my class would be reaching out to them to try to get some feedback and their ideas about the academy. So that was very valuable. That came in. An extensive list of topics and subjects for the curriculum, elements for a business plan. You're seeing a theme here. We made progress toward each of these things, pretty good progress. But by the end of the semester, the group working on the business plan didn't have a full-blown business plan. We didn't have a full-blown curriculum, but we had a page full of topics and subjects for a curriculum. In terms of what didn't work so well, I scheduled the class from 1:30 to 3 on a Monday, Wednesday. The problem with that is all the youth are in school. I know there are a lot of out-of-school youth as well. And if I do this again, or whatever the next step is, I'm gonna think about that and find a way to do that as well. But it would have been better to have this class either no time at all, although I don't know if we could coordinate schedules with that many students. But it would have been better if the class was later, or maybe once a week class, so we could go to some of the community centers where the older students are. So we had a little bit of an inability to connect with older youth. We went to some community centers, but the kids there tended to be younger than the kids we were thinking about for the academy. The old saying, you give an inch, right? I intentionally took a rather informal approach to the management of the class. And at some point, that resulted in students showing up at 1:45 with their lunch instead of 1:30, students talking over other students. So there was a big management role here for me as the instructor. Coming off of COVID, I realized our students didn't have the kind of networks on campus as I thought they might have. And we can talk a little bit about more. I feel like I'm maybe talking a little too long here. The issues facing students didn't just go away because it was a project-based course, right? We had one student who got in a pretty bad car accident, a few students who got COVID over the course of the semester. And the issues around well-being and mental health, they were there, right? We were just coming off. I mean, this is an in-person class. But those things didn't miraculously disappear. So we had to navigate those. Students are never going to be as excited about this stuff as we are. And I personally had to find a balance between doing it myself and, and letting them do it. The overall feedback on the student evaluations were fantastic, very positive. But there was a reality to this, and I'll just share, there were a number of these I could share with you. I'll share two. I'll do the bottom one first. Everyone was so excited, but looking at I can't see the whole thing, but looking at the group, I don't see that excitement anymore, right? So the hard work, it was well designed in January, but as we moved into February and March, and now the real work was really starting, right? We were getting deep into this. And I think I didn't do as good a job managing that, right? So I think it's we love the idea, but when the work came, there were students who felt like they were doing most of the work. Other students were just riding their coattails. This top one, though, is a very important one, right? When you come from privilege, I'm going to have to go to hang on, because I can see you. When you come from privilege, it is hard to understand the work I feel that we're trying to do in this class. It is the honest truth, because someone's white savior complex can kick in. I don't feel bad for saying this, because I think there needs to be a common ground of understanding, because some of my classmates do not look like me or have had the same experiences. So there was an element of this, and in our group, Kiara, who's on with us, was talking about language, I think. And some of the language that the students used, other students found it offensive. So we had to talk about that. In hindsight, I didn't see some of this feedback until the end of the semester when they turned in their journals. So I probably should have asked for the journals along the way, or, through individual meetings, sort of, talk with the students individually. All right. Oh, wait, that's good. All right, so I needed a better transition slide for that last one, I think. So let me stop sharing, and we can have a conversation. Sorry, Kim, if that went too long.
No, that's great. Yeah, so does anybody have any questions for David? Thank you, David, for that presentation. Terry, go ahead.
Well, I'm just wondering now, building upon that experience, what are you engaged in and what's the next steps?
You were breaking up a little bit, but I think you said, what are we engaged in and what are the next steps for this project? Right. So I did, one of my friends, he zoomed in, and suddenly I'm drawing a blank on his name. It's the years of sleep apnea kicking in. So this gentleman is a leader in the community. He's had some medical issues. He's had a couple strokes, but he's still deeply committed. He was the driving force behind our Underground Railroad Heritage Museum here in Niagara Falls. And the students all agreed that we would like to name this academy after him, right? And so this has to answer your question, really has to be in the context of my 23 years of working in the community. So I've learned some hard lessons along the way. And there was something called a COPSI grant years ago through HUD, Community Outreach Partnership Centers. So universities could apply for these in partnership with a community. And so I was in my early 30s and very excited about this grant opportunity, because I wanted to work with the Highland community, which was right next to the university. And so myself, a priest, and a friend of mine from career development went to Mount Sinai Baptist Church to meet with the pastor and a group of residents. And I was talking about how wonderful this grant would be, and the benefits it would have for the community and the university. And when I was done, Reverend Spencer stood up and said, "Dr. Taylor, I don't mean any disrespect, but frankly, we're not on your timetable." And that opened a whole can of worms in this community, in this neighborhood, their perceptions about Niagara University. And had I gone back to NU and shared with administration the feedback, they would have been hurt because they could have listed all the things that we've done with the Highland community. But as the sociologist W.I. Thomas once said, and again, gender specific language, but if men perceive things as they're essentially real in their consequences. I'm butchering that quote a little bit. I apologize. So I have been deeply engaged in the city of Niagara Falls for more than 20 years. And so there's a lot of connections that I have that are ongoing to this day. So I have to decide, right, what do we want to do as the next step? Do I offer this course again next spring in the same sort of way? Do we take the framework and the foundation that the students laid this semester and task that next class with taking it maybe even to reality? So yeah, those things are to be decided. Sorry, that was a long answer.
Right. We have a question here in the chat from Harold McNairn, and it says, since ABCD is about centering frontline communities, could you say more about Black-led racial justice groups / associations connected with this project?
Yeah, so I was mentioning reaching out and giving my students, I prepped my community partners, told them what we were doing, and said that my students would be following up with them with an email. And I actually encouraged my community partners, if they were willing, to actually meet my students in person, because our students don't get enough of that sort of one-on-one. I would say all but 2 or 3 of the people on that list were people of color, all working in organizations that are involved in organizing, that are involved in education. And so we have in Niagara Falls, we have a branch of the NAACP. We have something called Niagara Organizing Alliance for Hope, NOAA, which is an organizing group that, I work with on different projects. I think the idea, so I don't think I really shared how I would use my assets with this academy. So we have a youth works group here now, and they come in for 8 weeks, a different group each week, and they're shorthanded this year. So I went with one of their staff persons to Sam's Club the other day, and he was amazed at how many people in Sam's Club I knew. I mean, it probably added a good half hour, 45 minutes to our trip. I don't have a lot of money. What I have are large networks of people, right? People across the spectrum in Niagara Falls. And the idea with the academy, because I don't want to create another whole thing with an executive director and all that. There's so many of them. I mean, Niagara Falls is the land of nonprofits. And truthfully, if I wasn't a professor, I'd be in one of those nonprofits. So a lot of my friends work there, but we have so many of them. But the idea was to capitalize on my assets, to have people come in and just give me a one-day presentation to the students in the academy. The academy it's not intended to be a school. It's intended more to be, I'd say, an after-school program or a program on the weekend off hours for the students. So I don't know if I don't think I'm fully answering your question. But as the academy develops, one thing that I didn't share, I'm getting my mouth is dry, I apologize. One of the ideas that I had for the academy that I didn't push on to the students was that a student would need to be sponsored to be in the academy. That doesn't cost anything. It would just be one person who, if we start to lose the kid, that person is like sharing the responsibility of finding that student and helping sort of shepherd the student through. And so, I think a lot about the Niagara Falls Ministerial Council, which is a group of Black pastors that I work closely with. And we also have Voice Buffalo. So we have a lot of organizations outside the city of Niagara Falls that have a small footprint in the city of Niagara Falls that I would work directly with.
Okay, and there's another question here from Carolina. She's saying, thanks for the sincerity and the self evaluation. I am a community organizer of a group of Latin families. We follow the ABCD approach. We have been advocating for 2 years for a change in the food served in St. Vrain District in Colorado. Nowadays, the spirits of the group are very low. The communication with the district was complicated. How can I motivate them to continue with our objective? And Carolina, please step in and if you that needs more clarification than what I read. Thanks.
So everyone's in Colorado, right? So the and by the way, I wouldn't say I'm an expert on a lot of these things. So we've got a wonderful group of people on the call who should feel free to kind of jump in. So when I started at Niagara, I went into graduate school from being a police officer. I never intended to be a professor. I got my master's degree at Indiana just so I could help me teach at the Maine State Police Academy. But I had the opportunity to go on to Irvine to get the doctoral degree. And I've never really been a person full of themselves, I don't think. I hope not. But I was really liking being a young professor when I came to Niagara. And one of the first people I met from Niagara Falls was my friend Norma Higgs. This is a long time ago. And Norma had been brutally assaulted in her garage, where she still lives to this day, by a person she thought would sexually assault her and potentially kill her. Somehow she fought him off and he left. She showed me the pictures, and I came to realize that Norma, who was the vice president of the Block Club Council at the time, didn't care about my book chapters, my articles, my recognition. She just didn't want to be victimized anymore. And so that really changed kind of my whole purpose for the rest of my life, where I still teach and I love my university work, but my real heart is with the community. And, sometimes, I think about my daughters who have grown up pretty sheltered. I didn't even realize it until as they've gotten older. And I think one of the ways that we can rejuvenate and reconnect is working directly with people in the community, people who are affected by the issues that you're raising, whatever that issue might be. COVID has taken quite a toll on all of us, right? And certainly our ability to form and nurture relationships. So we almost need across the board a recharge. But does anyone have a better answer than mine that you can share, or thoughts? I mean, it's tough with this many people, but we can have a little discussion.
Well, I'd like just to offer something about the management, to that point where give an inch, take a mile. You may be familiar with Ira Shore's book on power sharing in the classroom, but just a little introduction to the students when you're introducing them to the course itself about the challenges of this different educational environment. And also, I think it might be an opportunity to give them a taste of restorative justice, where they, at their groups, each of them could fill out privately a performance rubric for their class. Was the work shared? Did everybody participate? And when they share with them with one another, if they see vast differences in their perceptions of the teamwork or the team strengths, and look at the assets of the team and where it could be shored up, and if there are disagreements to do, when you don't fulfill your role in the team, then there's something that needs to be restored through that restorative justice model, and then you've just really brought them a whole nother skill.
Yeah, I love that. And again, one of my connections is she's the director of it's called NARP here in Niagara County, but it's a restorative. That's a great idea. I also think I probably should have some friends on standby for my class, particularly dealing with some of the issues I talked about that students were facing, because I wasn't necessarily equipped to be the one to talk about some of these things with them.
Right.
And I probably need to check on my whiteness for sure, right? So I know that. One of my favorite, he's exactly the same age as me, but there's a great podcast, if you've never heard of it. It's called Seeing White with John Bewin. He's out of Duke University. But he does a whole season on this, and he has a gentleman, a cultural media studies faculty member, Chenjerai Kumanika, who just does just that, right? Sort of checks him, he has another series called Men, and he has I think if I said her name, Hanley, she's an NPR podcaster herself, and she sort of checks his maleness. So I think, right, I mean, I need that when I teach these sorts of classes and these topics, because again, I'm still learning and I'm on my own journey, like I imagine everyone else is here.
And you know, one other thing that was effective for me in watching some teaching going on is that at the end of the class, the group had standards of what they wanted to happen in that class, how they wanted to be with each other. And and many workshops start out with those ground rules or things. And at the end of each group meeting, they could assess, have we lived up to these shared values, and you know, where can we get stronger, but make that really a very overt piece of the group work.
Yes, thank you. That's a great suggestion.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much to all of you for some really important questions, and David for his presentation. I think we're going to move into our small group sessions. Once again, our breakout rooms. I'm trying to keep you with the people you were with this morning, but some of you got moved around just because some people have left. But basically, the question to think about is, in what ways does the story that David shared make you think about doing your institutional work differently? And what are some ways you can imagine, what ideas has it sparked to change the way you create classes or do your work? Okay, I think everybody's heading back here. I hope you had some good small group discussions. Does anyone have any sort of reflections, like 1 or 2 words you want to throw out about maybe something you discussed or something you learned today, or just a feeling you have coming away from this session? You can just shout it out if I don't see your hand up.
Grateful.
Thank you.
Widespread.
Oops, what was that?
Kim, I just put in the chat, JP was able to share like a very short, like 5-minute, like ABCD, like animation. We were talking and the question was asked, like, what are some resources that, you know, could be used? Because in terms of like this generation, they want things like quick. And like, what could we provide to them to help them to kind of understand, you know, about ABCD? And JP was able to share. So I just put it in.
Oh, excellent. Thank you, Cynthia, for that. And thank you, JP, for doing that. That's awesome. All right. Anything anybody else wants to share?
So Kim, you'll capture the chat in the recording? Okay.
Yeah, we'll have the recording. I'm going to send out to all the participants the recording. Once we do a little editing, we'll capture the chat so that we have those resources saved. And I just want to thank David for today's session. I want to thank all of you for coming and participating so fully. We have our ABCD Institute Higher Education Working Group is, as I think I mentioned earlier, hoping in the future to gather as many of these stories as possible and put them into some sort of publication. And you are all welcome to join us in that working group. And if that's something you are interested in doing, you can email me and get more information. So I'm going to put my email in the chat along with a link to we just sent out another call for submissions. We have another one of these in July and potentially one set up for August, but they were been going so well, we decided to send out a new call for submissions. So if any of you have stories that you'd like to share at this series, please, I just put a link in the chat for the Google form. It's a pretty simple Google form. We're collecting submissions now until about July 15th, and we'll be able to let people know by August 1st. Our next event will be July 19th and called Building Capacity for Authentic Community Engagement. And it's with Professor Mark Chupp of Case Western Reserve University. And it's a story about using ABCD principles to build trust between a private university and its adjacent neighborhood, and by bringing together the capacities of the local stakeholders, and by also developing the first at Case Western Neighborhood Advisory Council. So I'll be sending out information to this. Hopefully you're all signed up to get event emails from the Institute, just in case we don't have our Eventbrite yet for that set up, but I'll put this, the link I'm just putting in is so you can sign up to get event emails from the Institute, and you'll then hear from there. So again, I want to thank you all for coming today. It's been a great discussion. David, thank you for sharing your process with us. And we look forward to seeing you all at the next event in July. Thanks very much. Have a wonderful day, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.